Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this bonus episode of the Hired Geek Podcast, episode number 115, with Julie Peller from Higher Learning Advocates, talking all about policy and how best to support student parents, as well as a plethora of other student populations of more inclusive, progressive policies. So Julie brings in just a wealth of knowledge and experience. Really appreciate her reaching out to be on the show. It was a really great conversation, very relevant for our times now, for sure. So other quick announcements. We just launched our Patreon. So you'll find a quick note about that in the show notes, in the description of the episode. And then we also still have our merch store going. So please do check that out. There's always great sales going on. So just keep an eye on the store. I always announce the sales here when they are going on. But some cool stuff there. And we'll always be trying to put some new designs there for you all to support the show there. Or you could do both, or either or. Patreon will have some cool exclusives there for the folks who support us there. So without further ado, though, this is bonus episode number 115 with Julie Peller. So we are here. This is going to be a great episode, a timely topic, focusing on a lot of things that are facing students right now, especially during the ongoing pandemic in this country and across the world. It's certainly things that are they've been going on beforehand and are going to continue going on, but this is kind of especially kind of salient and kind of a relevant topic for this current moment. So I'm so glad to have our guest here today that allow her to introduce herself and get started to make sure we can have plenty of time to explore this topic. But Julie, if you want to introduce yourself really quick and give a brief overview of your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today, and then we'll move on to a bunch of other stuff.
Sure. Thanks so much, Dustin. I'm happy to be here, and I agree with you. This is a timely and pressing conversation. I'm Julie Peller. I'm the Executive Director of Higher Learning Advocates. I founded the organization just about 4 years ago with the mission to change federal policy to update for who today's students are. That was an issue that was pressing 4 years ago and is even more of a pressing issue now, given the pandemic and all of the changes that are happening in higher education. I got to founding Higher Learning Advocates based on my career as a congressional staffer and looking at what Congress was considering and what was being, more importantly, brought to us as we were reforming the Higher Education Act, other large reforms to student aid. We heard a lot from colleges and universities and a lot from traditional students. But we didn't hear a lot from student parents, from working learners, from community college students, who are really the fabric of so many of our institutions and landscapes in higher education, and really felt that they needed a voice and they needed an advocate in Washington to make sure that policies reflected their needs as well, not just that 18 or 19-year-old playing Frisbee on the quad.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think it's certainly a context that is unique to me and in my experience and people that I know, and just to the show, really, of like kind of coming at that angle of like, 'cause I think I saw in your Twitter bio that like kind of being like, policy wonk kind of thing of like, it's really important. It's really impactful to have like, these sweeping legislative changes that allow for, I know, like I saw recently with like, the recent COVID relief package of like changes to Pell Grant eligibility for incarcerated students and stuff like that. So like, it's the idea that like, that's huge, like, and the idea that like advocating to make sure that all sorts of policies regarding higher ed are, supporting, like you said, like who makes up the majority of current students, these students who really are trying to realize that kind of dream of the potential and the promise of higher education to uplift people to where they'd like to be. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned that you have a very kind of long background on that kind of more legislative side, but I guess I'm just curious because I guess kind of confirm my understanding too, because it sounds like you're sort of like, think tank. It just, you're kind of giving that kind of consultative point of view to representatives in government and everything. Like it sounds like that really is kind of what your background is, but maybe even just like how you sort of happened into higher education being your focus. Like, was that like a willing choice, or was that something that you kind of maybe just like stumbled into?
So, I think like many people in their careers, I kind of stumbled into it. The issues of education and opportunity for through the power of education is something I've always been passionate about. But the beginning of my career was actually in K-12 education. My first job out of graduate school was with the Department of Education, focused on K-12 reforms, and that's really where my background was. But I had the opportunity I was part of a presidential management fellow program, which is kind of this government program to bring in people out of graduate school and give them extra training and opportunities to come into the career service. Part of that is a rotation or kind of an internship in your first 2 years. And that's where I went to Capitol Hill with the Committee on Education and Labor. The spot they happened to have open was higher education. And it was really there that I saw the power of federal policy and the importance of uh, uh, higher education and the what those two combined could do. So I did kind of happen into higher education. At the time, higher ed was mainly a finance policy. We talked a lot about student loan interest rates and subsidy rates to private banks. And I also have a budget background, so that kind of fit. I'm happy to say that the conversation has much evolved in higher ed, and now we talk about outcomes and opportunities for students as much as we talk about student loan interest rates for banks. And so that's a happy evolution, but I did kind of happen into it. I like to say that my 7 years on the Hill was the longest 6-month internship I've ever had, because I came up there and just never left. And so I between Capitol Hill and here, I spent some time as the director of federal policy at Lumina Foundation, which is the perhaps the largest foundation in the country that focuses solely on these issues of higher education, of increasing talent, of connecting pathways in the post-secondary space for students. And so there I was able to bring kind of that deep legislative knowledge to see all of the innovation that's happening across the country and find the connection between how we could scale or replicate or bring new voices into a pretty insular DC conversation. And that's a value that I hope I bring to higher learning advocates as we push and push an agenda and push our policies in this policy context.
Well, yeah, we'll spend a minute here as well of higher learning advocates where, like you said, you're doing this work of bringing those voices in and everything. And yeah, I mean, it just sounds like, I guess from the jump, like you've always just been like, really focused on policy and all that. Like it's just everything kind of leading to this moment of really being, well positioned to do this work too. But I guess maybe if you just want to give examples, because I think, you've kind of explained like just the overall architecture of higher learning advocates, but like maybe examples of things that you've been focusing on over the 4 years that you've been doing this work of the things that you are seeking to achieve through the bringing those voices in and speaking with people on the Hill.
Absolutely. So this past year in particular, the needs of today's students became on the forefront. And we've really been pushing for three things this year alone. The first is need for emergency aid. So for a long time, policymakers and institution leaders have thought about college costs as tuition and textbooks and maybe meal plans on campus. But students often get tripped up by emergency costs that come about. Their parent gets sick and they need to fly home, or their car breaks down and they can't get from campus to work or home to campus. And those things can stop a student's academic journey. In this environment, when suddenly all students needed to return home, those needs were even more great. And so we've been pushing for emergency aid assistance, and we're successful in federal support for emergency aid assistance so that institutions can help students with those costs that come up and that they don't have to drop out of school as a result of them. Another thing that we've been advocating for this year is equitable access to broadband and internet. Again, as students went home, their access to internet was very inequitable. Some had, fast broadband and can get onto Zoom and do their coursework just fine. And others were writing term papers on their phones in parking lots of McDonald's. And certainly there's an advantage to the students that had that ability at home or in a safe place rather than trying to make it work. And so we, at the end of the year, were able to secure some assistance for students to be able to level that playing field and make sure that in this environment where we're all working and learning and being at home a lot more, that getting online is as critical of a need for higher education as access to dollars for tuition. The third thing we've been pushing for this year, and this is really where we an example where we're bringing in voices that weren't otherwise in the conversation, is highlighting the need of student parents. Student parents are kind of, I think of like the bleeding edge of student needs, particularly in this pandemic. They're facing issues with childcare, issues with work, and changing nature of higher education. And many don't think about parents as students, but it's almost 1 in 4 of students today who is a parent themselves. And so we've been talking with advocates and those who work with student parents across the country and do research on student parents and thinking about how we can support them, how federal policy can be changed to recognize this population and support them going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely all, really important areas and kind of, feeding into each other in different ways, I'm sure. But I guess, yeah, I mean, you're kind of getting to just capturing, tangibly, because I think we're kind of speaking offhand or, sort of anecdotally about the current landscape for student parents and, issues they might be facing. So we can kind of just get right into those topics. So if you want to give a snapshot of, more kind of just, kind of figures or just sort of ways to kind of capture the current landscape for student parents in higher education right now, and just some of those issues that you see that they're facing, which again, I'm sure, the other kind of points of focus that you mentioned kind of bleed into here, but yeah, just talking through that a little bit and then we'll move on from there.
Sure. So like I mentioned, student parents are about a quarter of students on campus. I think of them as often an unseen population because they don't generally show up on campus with a kind of I am a parent sticker, but it's 1 in 4. So that's about 3 million students. And on top of that, so many student parents, about half of them are students of color, and a lot of them are single mothers. And so they're facing, like I said, not only the challenges of being a student in this time, but the challenges of being a parent, and often a lower income or single parent in this time. They're dealing with childcare costs where, in more than half the states, that's more than tuition on top of their tuition and higher education costs as well. And so they're likely to be more likely to have higher student loan debt. They're more likely to have unmet need in order to kind of make ends meet at the end of the day.
A lot of these things, it's like there's not necessarily new problems in the age of the coronavirus. It's like accelerating or kind of expanding, things that were already there. So like, it's almost like making it clear, like, okay, you can't ignore, people not having access to reliable internet at home or, students struggling with just monthly costs and bills and those sort of things. And just the need for kind of flexibility and, those different needs for student parents. And we can spend a kind of a moment too of like really digging in, because I know students of color, like just, and then, student parents of color, like I can only imagine, because I'm seeing a lot, the continued conversation around things like canceling student loan debt would be something that is like, hugely impactful, more so for students of color. Because like you said, they're probably going to be taking out more student loan debt to cover all of those additional costs so that they can attend. So, looking at it through that lens of like, wow, okay, it can be especially impactful for this group that is, again, trying to kind of realize that potential and the promise of, going through higher education, getting that credential, and kind of having that be able to open doors and everything. So, I guess if you want to speak to that a little bit more, of like those disparities, because I think sometimes it is like you're just looking at like one figure and you're like, well, wait a second, certain groups are grossly overrepresented in terms of like, like who has the most student loan debt, or who has debt and no credential to show for it, and those sort of things. So anything that I guess you can talk about there, of just kind of highlighting those disparities and understanding kind of the urgency of the need here.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on the biggest one when we think of students financing higher education. It's not just for the time that they're in higher education, particularly those who are relying on student loan debt. And we know that students of color are much more likely to, and particularly Black students, are much more likely to rely on student loan debt in order to make that financing work. And that impacts their families, not only while they're in college, but after college, which makes it so much more important for key outcomes like completion, like earnings and employment to be there for those students. And unfortunately, we also see the disparities on that end as well, where unfortunately students of color are not completing and repaying and earning at the rates of their white peers. And so it's both kind of an incoming question of how we talk about financing as an equity disparity, as well as let's look at the outcomes. We can't just look at averages anymore. We need to start looking by race and ethnicity, by populations such as student parents or adult learners or working learners, and really target solutions to be able to address and those inequities in the system, because they are system problems. They're not individual student problems. When it's been happening for so long and in such a widespread manner, it's really time to take a look and say, how can institutions, policies, and practices really change to close that gap? One thing that you did say that I would just want to lift up is, in this time of the pandemic, I think these inequities are so much easier to see, and we're literally in people's homes in a way that we weren't before. And I hope that kind of that empathy and seeing people as people and seeing their struggles that they may not have brought up before, right? A student parent or a low-income student might not have thought of that window or that faculty member to say, hey, listen, I can't do this exam because my kid's got strep throat and I was up all night, or I can't pay my library fee this semester, but it's because I need to keep my lights on or I need to feed my kid. Those aren't conversations that are easy to have, and they've been incumbent upon the student to have. But I hope that one long-standing thing is that we now see these inequities. We see these issues that students are facing, and I hope that institutions and policies that continues, even if we get past the pandemic and we're all back on campuses. We continue to see people as people and not just kind of student robots who show up on campus.
Well, yeah, I just want to like sit with that for a minute too, because I was just speaking with a colleague and just that experience sometimes where. And I think there's a lot of things kind of embedded in this, and maybe this kind of, we can spend a little time on this too, of just like maybe your experience, but like, just sort of, the bureaucratic power structures of higher education, and like, students just, especially right now, just so desperately wanting to kind of do the right thing and show up and be successful and all that, to where they'll, and this is almost tragically like sometimes true, but also kind of exaggerated example of where like, they would be like in the back of an ambulance and be like, I'm sorry, I can't like, be on video for my live session, but I'm going to sit on even though I just like broke my leg or something, like, and it's just like, no, you're going to the hospital. Just like talk to me later and get better. What like the idea that like they will try to surmount all these things and just like grit and bear it. And it's just like, yeah, trying to be more human, trying to be more accessible and flexible and, just empathetic to these students and everything that they are, dealing with. And like, and then that idea where it could be like, well, I've got a hold of my account, I can't register for next term because of a library fee. That is the only thing preventing me from registering. I've got everything set up and good to go. And just like that one little like strategic intervention of like, okay, yeah, cool, yeah, we'll pay that fee for you, and you're good to go and can persist. And so, and I think it was like what you're saying before too, like there's a big financial piece of this, like that's kind of the umbrella that kind of shadows over everything that we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, you've got, things paid for, your tuition and some of those other financial pieces. But, we need to make sure that you're successful in your classes, that you pass them and that you graduate. And then also that you're prepared to put your best foot forward, in terms of, career preparation, just knowing how to navigate finding the types of jobs that you want to get and those sort of things. So like, there's that space too of like, the support resources. And I know like, I work in, student success coaching for online graduate programs, and just seeing like how beneficial that is to have somebody who's just like right there with you and kind of, cheering you on from the sidelines, but also like giving you that kind of counsel, like, hey, well, you might want to go about this way and that thing, still ultimately, obviously it's the student always, performing and succeeding in their courses and everything, but just seeing how impactful things like that are to help those people who need it most to, not just afford their, education, which again is a very large piece, but be successful and get everything that they need to be able to persist and retain and all that good stuff. But I guess anything that comes to mind for you there of just sort of like, because this is almost like in the weeds, like the kind of micro pieces of it of like, students trying to navigate, often it's just very complex bureaucracies of higher education and stuff like that. And, again, just like the disparities, I'm sure showing up here as well.
Absolutely. And I think it is in the weeds, but I think the solutions can be both small and systemic at the same time. I think the hardest thing to both change and the most impactful thing to do is to change culture. Mm-hmm. When you think particularly about first generation learners, or I keep coming back to the student parent population of people who either don't have family or community networks that have been through the system before, who can say, hey, you could call there's, I'm sure, an Office of Student Success on campus, or you can reach out. It's okay and appropriate to raise that you're in the back of an ambulance. You can't come to class today. They're not going to kick you out for that. They'll hopefully be willing to work with you on it. That door needs to be opened and shown to a lot of students that that's okay. I think that particularly for students who have been historically underrepresented on campus, again, low-income students of color, there's this pressure on the individual student to fit this idea of what the bureaucracy or the system of higher education looks like. And that does not mean an openness to bring their kind of quote unquote outside aspects of their lives into it. And I think the more that can be done to be clear to students that institutions have their success at heart, and that means helping them navigate the system and dealing with the complexities. And listen, everybody has things that come up, right? And so that can look like a faculty member reaching out, that can look like an Office of Student Success, or that can look like an advanced data warning system like a Georgia State has, right? It could be small and it can be big, but it all comes down to seeing their students as people and being a resource to help the students get to the finish line while they're on campus, either in person or virtually.
Well, when we're kind of talking through, just some of those like examples of things that can be done to be acting as a kind of good actor in this space. So we'll kind of sit with this for a minute of just like, because we've talked a lot about the problems. So let's, move to the solutions. Because again, there's, I think, like a treaded path that I think, again, it's trying to change that culture and kind of making sure faculty and staff are following through on the expectations of being, flexible and accommodating and empathetic and those sort of things. But so if you want to give any examples, we can spend time on both, but start where you will, because my brain's kind of thinking of like, how you've seen institutions responding positively to these issues. And then maybe, again, there's, that policy piece that I kind of want to include here of maybe anything that you've seen happening lately on the policy level that's been reassuring or, maybe what you're hopeful for or whatever. But I guess, we'll start with the institutional piece. Anything that you want to just kind of emphasize in terms of like just some examples of other things that you've seen have kind of positive impacts with all the things that we've mentioned.
Yeah, so on campuses, I think some of the best examples that I've seen really fit the specific community's needs and really listen to what's going on campus. So take, for example, Leech Lake Tribal College in Minnesota. They opened a drive-through pantry to kind of help students as well as their wider community, given where they're situated during the pandemic, and so that they kind of saw that as a community need and not just a student need. Others have done things like family-friendly campus toolkits, or opened up kind of a childcare center on campus, or food pantries on campus for students that have really tried to meet those basic needs for students. Another campus kind of campus-based solution that I find is really interesting is a new platform that was released this spring, which was incredibly timely, that helps students navigate kind of changes to their financial aid picture, called Swift Student, where students can appeal their financial aid information to campuses. Say, they lost a job, or their parent lost a job, or there's unforeseen healthcare costs or something like that. But that process is really wonky, even for a wonk like me, and really hard for students to navigate. So what Swift Student did was they created a form, and kind of through a click-through, students could go through the platform and write that appeal to their financial aid office, and it helped them navigate through that system. And I think, so while that's not a specific on-campus solution, that's a great example of how just helping the students navigate the rights that they already have can really help change a picture for individual students.
That's great to hear. We'll definitely link out to that. And then, I guess anything, because I guess that the Swiss student is sort of in that vein of just like, things that you're sort of seeing that are kind of giving you hope, or, just seeing good examples of ways to support. Because, honestly, like we're saying, it kind of our initial focus really is like student parents, where like all of this applies to, but it really is applicable to, I think you listed off kind of the whole kind of, litany of other kind of populations that really are needing this level of support, who are, just frankly, the students who benefit the most from higher education, this current moment of making sure they have the right skills and education to, get the jobs of tomorrow. But, anything else like policy wise that you see that like, because I know, again, like there's stuff that was in the most recent COVID relief package, or things that you're hopeful for with like a new administration coming in. Just kind of on that more like policy side. Then we'll start to kind of close out with a couple more things.
Yeah. So on the policy side, I mentioned a little while ago this issue of emergency aid and this emergency grants, and the federal government provided some assistance beginning in March through the original CARES Act to $6 billion to be sure that campuses had funds to provide emergency aid. And they've since, and in that last package at the end of the year, increased that amount. That's a great need in this pandemic. What I'm excited that the Congress and the Department of Education have acknowledged that need. That need was there before the pandemic, and that need will be there after the pandemic. And so I'm hopeful for the recognition in this emergency time, and I continue to push and want to highlight the permanent need for an infrastructure and support for those kind of things. Institutions and the way our federal student aid programs are set up don't currently really have a permanent infrastructure to support those kind of emergency grant programs on campuses. And I hope that that'll be something of conversations going forward. Another place that I'm really hopeful for is Congress and and I'm hopeful the incoming administration will think about how students fit into policies outside of federal student aid. For a while we've looked at Pell Grants and student loans and other programs on campuses as the only solution to meeting students' needs. But through the pandemic, we were able to lift up students' needs in other conversations, like access to broadband, like access to SNAP, that students were shut out of those programs or were not just thought of as possible or needed beneficiaries in those programs. And so I hope that continues, and we're bringing it back to student parents. Things like expanding the child care and dependent care tax credit, or the increasing support for the Child Care Development Fund. These areas that you don't necessarily think of students as a core population, but they are, and they should be considered and thought about in these policies. And so I hope as we think about, and I think just today the president is announcing as kind of first set of policies to think about economic recovery, is how do we think about students, either current students or likely students or those who want to be students, as potential beneficiaries to other sets of policies that meet basic needs and allow them the time, the space, and the financial resources to be able to kind of further their education.
Yeah, because it is fascinating, just like now that it is really laid bare, and thankfully I feel like the momentum's moving in the right direction, where it's like for a reason, like tax policy is just like, oh no, you can't be both. You can't be both a student and a parent, or sort of like different things like that. Like it's just like, why not? Why? Like what? I don't understand.
Exactly. Or in a lot of, and I think a lot of the basic needs conversations really focus on people working or looking for work. And we don't think about education as part of that pipeline. We think about training, very, very short-term targeted training as part of that pipeline, but not often a longer-term pursuit in higher education as something that's kind of on par with looking to get ahead. And how can we start thinking about that differently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just really modernizing and kind of interweaving all these things, these policies and stuff, so that everybody gets the benefits that they are entitled to. And because I even think it was stuff with like some of the stimulus parts of the COVID relief, where I think there was sort of ineligibility for students, stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much work to be done here, and thankfully, it seems like there's some awareness and kind of appetite for making these changes, which it's definitely reassuring. But as we wind down, and I think we've got some great resources already, and certainly we'll have ways to connect with you and higher learning advocates, to keep the conversation going and check out everything that you all have on your site. But any other like resources, like books, podcasts, articles, things that have been grabbing your attention lately, or just like kind of good like foundational pieces if folks want to kind of build up their understanding of adult learners, student parents, and all the above?
So I'd like to put in a plug for my former employer of Lumina Foundation. They do a lot of work on this population, and in particular, their magazine it has great student profiles and lifts up, I think, a lot of the interwoven issues of students. And this is why it's hard to stick with one population, because student parents are also working parents or working learners and adult learners and low-income students, and it's all kind of combined. But the Lumina Foundation Focus magazine really does some really great reporting on what's going on there. When we think about student parents, I always go to the Institute for Women's Policy Research, and as the standard bearer of research on what student parents are facing, how they're interacting, both with being parents and being students. And so I would highly recommend checking that out. And then one more kind of more direct service organization, but is certainly up and coming on the policy space, and is a great resource, is Generation Hope, which is a organization based here in Washington, D.C. that works with student parents and does that student support side, and really helps them navigate that system. And they're an incredible organization to watch and to learn from and listen to of what their fellows are facing and what solutions are really helping them.
Yeah, great stuff. And we'll definitely link out to all that. And we will end the episode as we always do. If you just want to share some final thoughts on this topic, I feel like there's just a lot of complexity to it, but I think we're seeing some clear paths forward of things that can be done. And I feel like you're one of the the folks in your team, obviously on the front lines, kind of inch by inch, trying to make some progress here. So certainly appreciate you for committing to doing that and everything. But just final thoughts, anything that you'd like to close on, any kind of calls to action or anything, whatever you'd like to end the episode on.
So, I think this week is, especially in federal policy, a lot of new beginnings. And I'm very excited and hopeful that among those new beginnings, today's students are now central to that conversation. They're part of the picture of who higher education is and who it should be for. And I think that Congress and the Biden administration have quite a bit to do, but today's students are part of the solution. And when they think about COVID recovery, when they think about economic recovery or issues of racial justice, today's students are issues, the policies that can help them are part of that solution. And I'm hopeful that we've seen that progress and will continue to push for it in the coming year, because their needs are great and their potential is even greater.
Absolutely. Great way to end the episode. And thank you so much, Julie, for all that you've shared. And again, for all the work that you and your team does. And like I said, everything that we talked about will be down in the show notes to check out. And thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.